Over There is brought to you by University of Maryland, University College.
We were in the Education Foreign Legion.
Our motto was, have notes will travel.
To begin with, you have to be a certain kind of crazy to do this.
We needed people who saw this as an adventure.
It was the Wild West, really.
Within 5 minutes of each other, there were two loud explosions.
I found myself in Vietnam teaching American history and government and very much opposed to the war. It was pretty remarkable.
There was no other university overseas. We were the ball game.
(1970). Vietnam. The war has been raging on for years. Into this chaos steps a group of sometimes unconventional-looking faculty from University of Maryland, University College.
I had longer hair than what the military is used to seeing. I had mutton chops.
Hugo Keesing lands in Vietnam to educate military students. His appearance causes a disturbance at the Officers Club.
There was an aviator in his flight suit who sort of got in my face and said, "What's that on your face?" And my comment, I mean, I was young, and this was my first encounter, was, this is usually referred to as hair. The sort of the exclamation point on what has to be one of the most memorable terms that I ever had was very close to the end when I was coming back from the mailroom, and coming at me was the base commander. And as we passed, he stopped and he looked at me because I still had longer hair and I still had mutton chops, and he said, "You're Mr. Keesing, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He reached out his hand, shook mine, and said, "I just want to tell you, I've heard nothing but good about your classes." And that was, to me, the nicest thing I could have heard.
How did Keesing end up in Southeast Asia teaching college classes to the armed forces? The story actually begins during World War II.
In the White House at Washington, President Roosevelt approves legislation to provide for America's war veterans in the peace to come. By law, federal loans, free schooling are among the benefits assured every man and woman in the service.
With the stroke of a pen, an education innovation is born. Motivated service people returning from World War II, veterans and active duty, now have the opportunity to attend college, making the dream of earning a degree a reality.
It came at a time when everyone was thinking you need some college or a college degree.
It originated really from the Pentagon. Officers have had very much the concept in their mind, which was extraordinarily progressive for the time, of the GI, of the soldier going to school.
We changed the whole approach of how education should be. We opened the doors.
In 1947, the University of Maryland is one of the first schools to offer courses stateside tailored to the GI. Registration is packed in the Washington, D.C. area, nearly tripling expected enrollment. With the Cold War looming, the American military experiences huge global growth. Answering the call for more classes around the world, 7 pioneers board a plane to Germany in 1949, planting the University of Maryland flag. This new endeavor calls Heidelberg, Germany, home. From there, the school expands to more countries.
A considerable amount of credit does have to go to Ray Ahrensberger. Ahrensberger was known as the Flying Dean.
He loved to travel. He also liked hands-on management. The locations where UMUC taught expanded during his period of leadership, and he'd like to get out into the field and visit faculty and visit classes, solve problems. Very much the Flying Dean.
Eventually, courses are offered in Asia, Antarctica, and the other continents, 80 countries in total. Over the next 70 years, 2 million students will enroll.
We always took unusual pride in beginning classes in very out-of-the-way, distant locations where there were only a few U.S. soldiers, whether that was at isolated bases in Australia, whether it was at the American Embassy in Moscow, the American Embassy in Beijing, whether it was in the Sinai, whether it was in the Balkans. That was a consistency.
Along the way, the college achieves other significant milestones. It is the first in the Maryland University system to welcome African American students.
Most faculty, like me, had never seen an African American in a classroom until they came to teach for UMUC, our society at that point. It was not fully integrated. I think it was quite a good learning experience for Caucasian students and faculty that these young men and young women, African American, could do very well, given the opportunity.
The school is also the first to educate in a war zone and the first to graduate students on military bases. Many faculty rotate to new bases every 8 weeks, the length of a typical course overseas. Their motto, have syllabus, will travel.
Ended up, after 28 years, having taught in 75 sites in 23 countries on 4 continents.
Iceland,
England,
Saigon,
Belgium,
Frankfurt,
Berlin,
Ethiopia,
Spain, and Italy, and Greece, and
Turkey,
and Bahrain,
Kuwait,
Qatar,
Bermuda,
Saudi Arabia,
Bosnia,
Croatia, and Hungary,
Diego Garcia,
and Vladivostok, Russia,
Okinawa,
Japan,
Korea,
Taipei,
Uruguay.
Afghanistan.
I think that's an informal record.
It was a very innovative program, and trying to work out class schedules and trying to cover classes by rotating staff from country to country, from area to area.
And it truly was a program upon, to borrow the slogan that we used for so many years, the sun never sets on the University of Maryland.
As the university grows and evolves, so does its name, becoming University of Maryland University College. No matter the name, recruiting the right people, armed with academic credentials, that was the trick.
A person who was interested in the unexpected, a person interested in faraway places with strange-sounding names, and that rang a bell with a certain kind of person. It certainly did with me. I thought I should have been paying Maryland rather than Maryland paying me.
Joe Arden, with a Ph.D. in international relations, is working in Thailand in 1967 when he receives a call.
And I said, do you mean that I might be traveling and living and spending time in different Asian countries? And he said, yes, that is correct. And so I left Bangkok with the result that a number of restaurants and bars went into a small recession.
So I was looking for people who were enthusiastic about their discipline, but then also had a sense of adventure and were flexible, because you always ran into different tough situations. Traveled light, traveled fast.
You have to be able to tolerate and deal with a high degree of ambiguity.
We had a name for those who didn't work out. We called them logistical nightmares. People for whom the travel was difficult, people who were uncomfortable with rapid change that they didn't control.
So you can imagine it wasn't for everyone.
They have to go where needed, when needed. If you get on the telephone call and say, I've got this great assignment for you in Iceland in February, I'd love to go to Iceland in February, or Korea, or where. It was a true mission. It was a true calling for UMUC and its faculty.
I saw one of our instructors teach in a tent in Vicenza. You know, it kind of rained, and the rain had kind of frozen, and they had those little heaters, and it was kind of dripping, and she's got a chalkboard and an umbrella, and she's writing on it. The guys are hunched over in their gear, and they're taking notes, or they're standing up so they stay awake.
On Guam, the lights would go out fairly frequently. They told us that the snakes would get up into the transformers and short them out. But I'm in this class just about ready to start the first night, and the lights go out. We're in the dark. And I found the officer of the day who was in charge of the installation at night, And I said, this is a warehouse. Do you guys have any flashlights? And he said, I'm sure, I guess we do. We put the big flashlights on the desks, shining up in the air so we had lights, and we held the class.
Julian Jones is in Army intelligence when he hears a radio ad. His new life as an academic provides unexpected freedoms, as he discovers when he writes an article about one of his adventures that ends up in Newsday.
I was so nervous that I was going to be fired from it. It's called Europe on No Clothes a Day, and it describes my experience near Saint-Tropez, inadvertently strolling onto a nude beach, and then taking my clothes off and joining them, and then writing about all the sorts of things, kind of etiquette on nude beaches. I thought that leadership at UMUC, when that came out and I was back here recruiting faculty, would be upset, but they loved it. They loved it.
I was 25. I was the first woman on there, on the European staff that they rotated. I had two fields because I was in American Studies. I could teach English and I could teach American history. And that was valuable to them in remote bases.
Nancy Durr learns about UMUC while completing her PhD in 1971. She finds herself leading classes on board a nuclear submarine supply ship anchored off the coast of Scotland. A motorboat ferries her there each day.
I know the first time I went out there, how amazing it was, how far it was to that ship. It took 25, 30 minutes to get out there. The access was a rope ladder, stable, but nevertheless, you had to climb it. And so just go hand over hand up it. Everybody did it, just clambered up, without a thought. And so I tried to be like that. Fake it till you make it. I tried to pretend that it wasn't intimidating, and I suppose I got used to it.
I saw this advertisement for the University of Maryland. You could teach and live and travel abroad. So I thought it would be just great to go to Europe and teach for a while. And I was an anti-war activist, and I was told I would have to go to Asia first before you went to Europe, which was the payoff. You had to do some time in what we then called the Far East Division. So I found myself in Vietnam teaching American history and government, and very much opposed to the war. So that's how I came to really know the University of Maryland. It was pretty remarkable.
And while faculty views of the conflict might vary, they learn to love military transportation and the exotic places it often takes them.
I took military transport.
Part of the trip was in a Black Hawk helicopter, and it was just like a carnival ride.
You sat in a sling seat and hoped you didn't have to go to the bathroom because you were the only female on board. And you prayed you actually went where you said you were going.
In the middle of the Australian outback, at a place called Woomera, faculty didn't like to go because there was nothing to do. They called it Doomera.
Ended in Iceland in the middle of a hurricane. It was bitter cold. It was difficult to walk from one building to the next.
Okinawa was famous for typhoons. We'd wind up spending 2 days with very little to eat and drink except for cheese crackers and peanuts.
I'd never experienced winds that much.
But, for 2 months you can handle anything.
Soon to be a couple, Gay Holiday and Raj Butts land a special teaching assignment in Siberia. The flight there to teach Russians in 1997 proves unforgettable.
And I noticed oil, streaming out of the engines. And so I thought, ooh. But anyway, so got on that airplane, and I looked around, and there was one guy back there in jewelry and black leather, Russian mafia. He said, would you like a drink? And I'm thinking, a drink? We're taxiing. But nobody seemed to care, so a little vino there, and we took off.
Lit up a cigarette, too, as I...
Yeah, I think so.
They were smoking, yeah.
Yeah. I expected the stewardess to come back there and smack us, but she didn't seem to care. Okay, so that was my introduction to
It was the Wild West, really.
Airflow.
In Russia and Siberia, there are no laws about seat belts. There are no laws about littering. There are no laws about keeping in your seat in an airplane. There are no laws about a lot of things, which they thought they were much freer than we were because we had all these limitations of law.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought maybe I had died and gone to heaven.
I have sometimes thought that I could have done the academic scholar track, but I took this living, breathing, teaching, military, overseas, non-traditional, adults, population, and it's been glorious.
When I came, I taught anthropology and psychology and business management. I just come in with my suitcase and I'd be a one-man university teaching courses in 3 different fields.
Aaron Elkin signs up for a short stint. The experience puts him on the path to success in another career.
After that first 2 years in Heidelberg, in Europe, I had no job to come back to. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I remember my wife said to me, look, you're pretty good with words. Why don't you write a book? What am I going to write a book about? You know, what I had published, my best-known work was the postcranial skeletal analysis of the CK-44 remains in northeastern Oklahoma, which I'm sure you've heard of. It was a New York Times bestseller. She said, write about your experiences as a professor. And come on, get real. She said, well, make it up, damn it. You know, you got your travel journals. So my first book, called Fellowship of Fear, is written about a college professor teaching overseas for an American university in Europe who starts off in Heidelberg and gets sent to Sicily, Spain, Sardinia, and goes through the same things I did. I got him out of my travel journal. And I just made up a few murders to throw in there to kind of make it exciting. And also, and my protagonist, Gideon Oliver, has an affair in that with a fellow teacher. And I just, in case my wife ever sees this, I want her to know that that was also made up. That is entirely fictional.
Working in and around real war zones results in plenty of close calls over the decades. Faculty and staff are evacuated as Saigon collapses in 1975. From Tehran when the Shah's regime falls in 1979, and when Mount Pinatubo erupts in the Philippines in 1991.
I don't think we've had a UMUC faculty or staff member as many war zones as we've been in, whether it's Vietnam, whether it was the Balkan Wars, whether Afghanistan or Iraq. I don't think that we've ever had an employee sustaining some kind of wound associated with the war per se. I don't think that's ever happened, but certainly hair-raising experiences.
Midway through the lecture, there was a horrendous explosion outside of the building where I was teaching.
Within 5 minutes of each other, there were 2 loud explosions and the windows shattered. It was very frightening for me because I'd never been exposed to anything like that. And 3 people were actually killed on Campbell Barracks.
The casualties rock Heidelberg that day. Bruce Janoff recalls another military loss during his teaching years.
I bought a motorcycle for $100, $100 US, from one of my students. He was a nice young guy. About halfway through the course, he quit showing up. And I said, what happened to him? And they said he got shut down. That's the only one that I remember who didn't come back. You know, I didn't know him that well, but any American, anybody who got killed, it was at a very, very young age is a terrible thing. You know, the war was not fun, you know.
When the faculty had to go into the Balkans, it was done where they had to wear uniforms. And, you know, the Kevlar vests and go in by helicopter.
I was stopped a couple of times, once in Ethiopia and once in Yemen by armed bands.
Back in 2012, we had quite a few sites already in Afghanistan, the largest of which was Kandahar Airfield. And we found out that in the spring of that year, we would have about 25 students deployed there who were going to graduate. So we thought, well, why don't we go down there and do a commencement ceremony? So they had these tables set up with fried chicken and sandwiches and potato salad and coleslaw. And I remember hearing the air attack siren go off. And I just froze for 3 or 4 seconds. I could not remember, am I supposed to, hit the ground and take cover? Do I run? Do I stop, drop, and roll? I had no, I just froze. I couldn't think. Well, luckily, there was a GI who was much bigger and much faster than me, and he went running by and grabbed me by the collar and shoved me in this bunker. And I remember, looking around and thinking, wow, in the blink of an eye, everything can change. You see your guest speaker turn into a commanding general. Our students turn right back into soldiers. And I remember thinking, wow, at hundreds of commencements, hundreds of people are going to talk about heroes. But here for us at UMUC, we sit amidst them every day. We sit right next to them.
We were in the war zones a lot of the time, and they really appreciated us as teachers, and we as faculty appreciated them as being hard-working students, and I had some of the best students I've ever had in this program.
These military students, non-traditional and older, made UMUC the largest university in Maryland.
If you go back to the 1980s, we had 50,000 students each year for 10 consecutive years. That's almost mind-blowing to people who don't realize the program existed.
They worked all day long and they showed up in the classroom, and very often they were tired, but they were motivated and they tried hard.
They were wonderful students. I bet you I could count absences on one hand.
So all day they're dealing with roadside bombs and the Taliban, and then a couple of nights a week they're in class.
Everybody brought their gun. They always had to bring their gun.
And one time we scheduled a Shakespeare at midnight class. We filled the class, and after all, Shakespeare's pretty powerful any time, night or day.
And the thrill of seeing them catch fire. For a professor, I think that's very special.
That was the most gratifying kind of teaching.
Ryan Lee Alton.
Over the years, UMUC has awarded degrees to some 206,000 students. 3 were members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the 1980s, including one chairman, General John W. Vesey, Jr., another Medal of Honor recipient, Florent Groberg, pioneering Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Donna Hildebrand, and even a soldier-turned-Hollywood actor and advisor, Marine Corps Captain Dale Dye, who needed a college degree to continue moving up in the service.
I said, I need to educate myself beyond just what I knew about the Marine Corps and what I knew about combat. I have to expand my horizons. I have to become the guy I think I am. While I was on Okinawa, I discovered that the University of Maryland had some really, really interesting professors and teachers, people who understood the military. That's the reason they were there. And I discovered one person in particular, Dr. George Sidney, PhD, who had himself been a Marine in Korea. And he said, look, you got some talent, kid. You're a writer, you're a storyteller, and we can make you a better one. He was selling education. He was saying, look, this is good for you. It makes you a better, more well-rounded person, a more perceptive person. And damn it, George was right. And he began to read the stuff that I wrote.
I sat down with him and said, Dale, I'll tell you what. Let me help you with this book, because I know something about writing.
And George critiqued that, and he looked at it. And he didn't do it because the University of Maryland told him to do it. He did it because he was a great teacher.
And then I sent it to an agent friend of mine, and they published it. And Dale went on to become the advisor to all war films that are being made.
Other alumni may not be as well known, yet their experiences are memorable.
My professor had us learn about Faust
and Hamlet, which is some great existential works. And I came up once and I complained to him because I was having to take these on my deployments. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to just give you an A because you can pass with an A, or do you want an A because you've actually earned it for your potential? And I never forgot that.
The experiences were unbelievable because people had such stories. The commonality we all had, even though you could have a couple of beers together, whatever, was very serious, and everybody wanted to do it. Our bonds are very strong. I'm in touch with people that I still am since April 1969 in that classroom.
The bonds uniting the students also embrace the faculty and staff.
30 years and 14 countries and 125 different military bases.
Reunions are must-attend events. One of the most recent took place back in Heidelberg on a river trip that was a UMUC tradition.
Of the 41 years that I worked there, I've taken this cruise probably 42 times, but I'll be happy to do it again. So.
The newbies would go on this beautiful ride and have fun, get to know each other, and then when we take them off the boat and say, good luck, you made it up and down the river, now you're on your own.
With the downsizing of the U.S. military and the boom in online instruction, fewer UMUC educators are stationed around the globe. Still, the camaraderie that blossomed so many years ago remains intact.
So we form these fast friendships with others who have done it.
You know, you feel like you're part of a family, you know. We worked Saturdays, we worked long hours. We weren't paid for that, but it was labor of love. We've had that shared experience that it's difficult to describe to someone who hasn't had it. And you cherish every moment.
There is a very strong sense of having been involved in something that was unlike anything else in American higher education. And it truly was unlike anything else in American higher education.
It was an adventure. I just loved it.
Over There is brought to you by University of Maryland, University College.